Ann Taylor has put out statements today that she's still requesting for the prosecution to turn over the genealogical DNAs and the 3 unidentified DNAs, the roadmap, how they got to Brian Koberger. Let's see what the experts have to say. This is for entertainment purpose only.
Starting with you on this, I'm wondering, what do you think the police have? And I know this is speculation. There's been some reporting out there that there was DNA evidence in this case that led authorities to Brian Koberger to identify him as a suspect. What do you think it was that possibly led to a DNA profile in this case?
Well, if what is being reported is accurate, my estimation, it's going to be a combination of things. First off, they would have found certainly a copious amount of blood at the scene. The question is, was it commingled with the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator's blood or any other kind of body fluids that might have been left around? You got to keep in mind, blood is not the only source for DNA-rich evidence. Another piece to this is going to be anything that was found on the bodies. And, you know, we go back to the hands being bagged, which is common practice in my field, to retain any kind of trace evidence. If there was anything contained beneath the fingernails, and we have to keep in mind, that's not simply skin. You can also find blood from a perpetrator beneath the fingernails as they're being raked away. And I think finally, whatever kind of tiebacks there might be in that vehicle, I think the vehicle is huge, because if he had allegedly been in that house and had committed these crimes, and I think admittedly he would have been super saturated in blood, that evidence would have transferred into the car somehow, and not just the blood, but any kind of other trace evidence he's taken away. So they've got this is an evidence-rich environment, and it will have been inoculated with everybody's DNA that was at the scene.
Lay out why law enforcement believes a suspect is guilty of a crime. This affidavit, we expect, will have exact details about why investigators were led to the 28-year-old criminology student from nearby Pullman, Washington. Possibly Koberger's connection to the victims, how he pulled off the crime, why they think it was him, all those things should be included. And one of the biggest details may be how, after saying for so long they did not have a suspect in mind, how they made that link. Likely more than the car he drives, that white Hyundai Elantra. National news outlets claim they know about that connection, and they have for several days.
So many family members that we've spoken to so far say they are relieved that someone is behind bars. Law enforcement sources have been telling us that a big crack in this case came from DNA, specifically genetic genealogy. And so we'll be hearing a little bit more about that, likely in that probable cause statement.
That was NBC's Gotti Schwartz from Monday, and that genetic genealogy, he said, was the big crack in the case, was something one of our viewers asked us about yesterday. Brian, could you delve into the DNA genealogy database used for the suspect at the U of I? Does the government now have genealogy info that previously was controlled by individuals and private organizations? And how accurate is this database? Well, to answer those three questions, it would require the knowledge of a DNA expert. And it just so happens we have one of those in our own backyard. With Dr. Greg Hampikian, terms like renowned and preeminent cannot be overstated. He got a degree in biology in 1982. He got a master's in genetics in 1986. He got a doctorate in genetics in 1990. He's been a board member of the Georgia Innocence Project since 2003. He started the Idaho Innocence Project in 2006, a year after he started teaching biological sciences at Boise State University. He's also the director of the Forensic Justice Project at BSU. He's a musician, a songwriter, a playwright. But back to that DNA expert stuff. Dr. Hampikian says he has used that expertise to help prove the innocence of wrongly convicted people around the country and around the world. Think Christopher Tapp in eastern Idaho and Amanda Knox in Italy. Normally in our backyard, today he's in Europe. But he took some time to speak with Andrew Bartline about the DNA forensic process and how it could have been used to solve this quadruple murder.
The crime labs are kind of behind the times. The genealogists have been doing this for more than a decade. The crime labs are just starting to do it.
Genetic genealogy, what is that exactly?
And so in this case, what it seems happened is they got some DNA. We don't know what from, maybe from an access point like a doorknob or a window. Once the DNA is sequenced, You can then take that file, just like a consumer would, to one of the genealogy sites that allows police to search public records of people who have opted in, saying, hey, if there's a murderer or rapist in my family, I don't mind if you use my DNA to try to find them. I don't think it says exactly that, but there's an opt-in box. And enough people have done that if there is a Caucasian DNA sample, you have better than 70% chance of finding the family tree, last name, etc., of the person who left the DNA.
So if they don't get a hit in any of the, I guess, criminal databases of previously convicted criminals, they would then go to a commercial outlet where people would voluntarily submit their DNA to find out their own genealogy that way?
There is a company, Verigen. For example, I've worked with them, and they have a program for the police. It costs about $500 a file that the police want to say, hey, we have this file. There's no hit to the convicted offender database. We use the genealogy type of DNA. Here's the file. Can you send us relatives to this piece of evidence? Just like it was somebody looking for their long-lost cousin. So after you get the genetic genealogy match, you get a buccal swab, a mouth swab from the person who is a suspect, and see if they match using traditional DNA methods. I imagine that in this case that they've probably already gotten that far through maybe a discarded cup or a cigarette butt or something like that. So they probably, for their probable cause, have already verified the match. But we'll see once it's unsealed.
I think a lot of people have this perception that DNA evidence is just a slam dunk land that we got the guy, but I guess through your work we've learned that that's not always the case.
The first time DNA evidence was reversed was a case that we worked on. Kerry Robinson out of Georgia. He was convicted with DNA evidence, and we showed that the DNA evidence in that case was bad. One thing I would point out is DNA is very, very good at telling us who might have been the original source of some biological material. It is absolutely, not good at telling us how material got somewhere. So if I, lend you my glove, you can leave my DNA somewhere. You need more than just the identification.
Dr. Hampikian adds that it is a difficult process. Typically, a genealogist is needed to sort through records and newspapers and assist police in finding out, who is alive, where people are, who might be around. And if these reports are true, Brian, that genetics played a significant role in this, in Koberger's arrest, Hampikian is confident that this is the process and how they did it.
It's fascinating to me. It's outside of my understanding completely, but I get it. I can follow the process a little bit. But that proving or disproving that DNA is what the system he used to show that Amanda Knox was not guilty, said that DNA was tainted, there was something wrong with it. So it goes both ways, as you said. Is it reliable? Sure. But what does it tell you? That depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah.
The question is, how did the law enforcement and the prosecution get the genealogical DNA of Brian Christopher Koberger? They can prove it from the leather knife sheet, but you heard the professor. They can't prove how it got there. He gave us a good example. If somebody borrows your gloves or scarf or anything and leaves it in another place, that is tricky. Ann Taylor is complaining that she's not getting all the evidence she asked for, the roadmap of how they got to Brian Koberger. The time of death was 2 a.m., after 2 a.m. I believe there are multiple people who did it. I do not believe that it's only Brian Koberger. It could be him, or maybe he was framed. There's something that's not right. They would have turned over the evidence unless the FBI got it illegally. I hate saying that, but that's the truth. They have to show the courts and the defense attorney how they got to a match. Where's the roadmap? Where's the homework?
A sample of his DNA post-arrest, and how strong is this biological potential genealogy match?
At this point, the genetic genealogy becomes irrelevant because they have that match. Now, all we know about at the moment is the paternity match to his father, which that is actually not genealogy. That is going back to that original crime scene or that crime forensic profile that they created at the Idaho crime lab. That paternity comparison would have been done using that CODIS STR profile marker, not the SNP profile marker that profile that we create for genetic genealogy.
I don't know what that means.
So this is a traditional paternity test comparison. They've been using these for decades. It's based on those 20 genetic markers that they use in court, that they use to create that profile they compare against the law enforcement database.
So,
Hey, thank you for a lot of attention to the use of forensic genealogy and DNA in closing these types of cases. His specialist Mike Anderson talked with a forensics firm here in Utah, specializing in genealogical investigations, to get their take on how investigators were able to make an arrest.
While DNA evidence played a major role in the arrest of Brian Kohberger, how it did that is drawing some confusion. Initially, reports suggested that forensic genealogy led investigators to Kohberger.
It would have been extremely exciting if in fact they had used this technique.
Kara Porter is among the many in the world of forensics that got really excited about the possibility. She's the CEO of Intermountain Forensics, only one of 3 firms in the U.S. that can do what they call Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy, or FIG.
What it does is it combines genealogy and law enforcement in such a way that you can do DNA testing, upload it, and you may get a match that's a third cousin.
DNA goes into a machine that closely analyzes it down to the genome level. The machine right over here can pull matches back to about first cousins fairly quickly, but the one back over here can pull much deeper family connections and genealogical databases, which is also why it's pretty expensive.
This is the most exciting development in law enforcement in decades. It is going to close tens of thousands of cold cases.
It's already helped close cases around the country and here in Utah, but Porter believes the technology will eventually be used in active cases too, since you can narrow down a lead from only DNA. It's why her firm is working hard to make sure it's more accessible.
We're a nonprofit, and our whole mission is to reduce the cost of DNA testing for law enforcement and families.
They're also looking to state lawmakers to allocate more funding to the resource. But back to Kohberger. Porter says in reading his arresting affidavit, it's pretty clear.
It's what most people would call a paternity test, yeah.
Investigators suspected Kohberger because they identified his car, couldn't get a sample of his DNA, so they instead went to his dad's garbage. A bit deflating, but she says any attempt